So again, step 3 is oxidation and decarboxylation. So we're taking a carbon dioxide off from an acid and oxidizing that alcohol. And step 4 is also oxidation and decarboxylation. We're decarboxylating this carbon dioxide here from this acid, and then the oxidation is really this carbon-sulfur bond. So it's just different. It's the same purpose of the steps, but it's happening a little bit differently. So let's start where we left off, and that's where we now have a 4-carbon molecule, and we want to get back to the structure of oxaloacetate. So the first thing we're going to do is remove this coenzyme A, and this is a high-energy bond. We're going to use the energy from breaking this bond to phosphorylate a GDP. GDP is a molecule that is much like ATP, and we can transfer the phosphate directly to ATP. So you can think of this as ATP. Now, we want to know that this is a symmetrical molecule, so these are equivalent. There's no chiral center here. And this is our first where we're getting direct energy from the cycle. So we don't get a lot of ATP just directly from this cycle. The energy that we get from this cycle is in the form of our NADH and our FADH2s. Remember, we get 3 NADHs and 1 FADH2 from this cycle. This is slightly exergonic, but it is not under control. We've already talked about the 3 steps that are under control. The rest of them are not under control. That means that their delta Gs are close to 0. So they're not going to be under allosteric control. And let me just go over one more before we go to our worksheet. What we're going to do is we are going to oxidize succinate to fumarate. Remember when I was going over the beginning that FAD is an oxidizing agent just like NAD. However, the FAD is a little bit stronger of an oxidizing agent. And so we're going to see this when we're putting double bonds between 2 carbons. You see NAD as the oxidizing agent for oxidizing alcohol to a carbonyl. You'll see FAD when we are oxidizing a carbon-carbon single bond to a carbon-carbon double bond. And we get fumarate in this. All right, so let's go back to the document camera. So again, the way we're doing this is that we're writing the purpose of the step on the line, the name of the molecule on the thinner line, and we're trying our best to draw the molecules. We have citrate synthase. We're writing the enzymes in the boxes, and I'm starring the ones that you need to know. Those of you that have not been able to write this down can come up during our break and either take a picture or write it down. Or this is where we ended, and I'll zoom in on it. We ended right here where we had our succinyl-CoA. I know my writing isn't great, so we have the acid group, the CH2, CH2, the carbonyl, and then that thioester bond with the coenzyme A. I drew it again here. I don't know if that helped. So that's succinyl-CoA, and this is the reaction. Remember, this is an inorganic phosphate, GDP, and a GTP comes out, coenzyme A. This is a hydrolysis reaction and a phosphorylation. It's not under control, but I did write the enzyme's name. When you guys do this over and over, I wouldn't bother to write in those enzymes that I don't require you to know. I would just put in the names of the ones that I have starred here. You don't need to memorize the other enzyme names. Only the ones that are under control. So this is the molecule succinate. Remember, it's acid, acid, and two CH2s in the middle, symmetrical molecule. We have an FAD as our oxidizing agent. We get an FADH2 coming out, and we get fumarate. Notice that that's a trans double bond. This is an oxidation, so we reduce our FADH2. Remember, this is going to go on to our oxidative phosphorylation of our ATP and our electron transport chain, and it's going to make 1.5 ATP. And this is our fumarate. I'll give you a moment to write that down. Okay, if you need more time, I'll give you more time in a moment. We're going to go back to the PC and talk about the last 2 steps. Remember, there's only 8 steps here. So here, what we're going to do is hydrate that. But remember, an enzyme hydrates in a specific spot. So it will put the hydrogen on this, well, they're symmetrical bond, 1 carbon here and the OH on the other carbon. And we only get 1 product, though. It's L-malate because this is a chiral center. So we get L-malate. And then the last step, we're going to do our last oxidation. So we get back to oxaloacetate. And we're going to take our L-malate and oxidize that. Remember, I said when you oxidize an OH hydroxyl group to get a carbonyl, you're going to use NAD as that oxidizing agent. And then we get our NADH, our last money molecule. And we're ready to cycle again. So I'm going to go back to our document camera, and we can finish up. So we're going to hydrate our fumarate with fumarates, put in water. And I know I didn't give you guys very much room to write the molecule down. I tried my best. That's alumate. And we're going to have an oxidation to oxidize this OH here to oxaloacetate. And then it will be ready to react with another acetyl-CoA. Any questions, guys, so far?
So in this whole picture, we just have to know the numbers, and that's just the 3 stars.
Okay, so on this whole thing, what I need you to know is not the numbers of the reactions, okay? I need you to know what's happening in each step. Just like in glycolysis, what I need you to know is what is reacting with what to produce what and why.
Okay.
In each and every step.
Good.
What is reacting with what to produce what and why. I need you to know details about those controlled steps, the enzymes, the inhibitors, and activators. Yes?
In L-malate, the first carbon at the top, that's an acid, so C.
Yeah, I forgot the little negative charge. So this, an L-malate, this should have a negative charge, COO minus. that in. All right, so take a look at it, though. Another thing I need you to know is what do we get from this whole thing? We're going to get 1, 2, 3 NADHs, an FADH2, and a GTP. That's a lot. What do we get from glycolysis? How many NADHs? 2 NADHs, and how much ATP? 2. Okay. Now we get 3 NADHs and FADH2 and an ATP. Now remember, that was for every molecule of glucose that accounting for glycolysis, right? So if we want to say for every molecule of glucose, we'd have to double it, right? So to be fair with that comparison of glycolysis, we'd have to double what we get here. Because remember, how many pyruvates do we get from every molecule of glucose? We get 2. 2 molecules of pyruvate. So then how many molecules of acetyl-CoA would we get? 2. So then we'd have 2 cycles. So for every molecule of glucose, this would all be doubled. We're going to talk about that a little bit more later, but I want to make that comparison, make sure that you're making that comparison fairly, because we wouldn't want to be unfair here in biochemistry. Okay, any other questions about what you need to know about this? Yes?
Are we going to need to know how to draw structures?
Are we going to need to know structures? The only structure that I really want you to know, being able to write on your own, is an acetyl group. I would like you to be able to recognize the other structures, and that's very different. So if you can look at it and see. So if you see a 6-carbon with a tertiary alcohol, you're going to know that that's citrate. If you see 6 carbons with a secondary alcohol, you're going to know that that's isocitrate. Alpha-ketoglutarate has that alcohol already oxidized. Succinyl-CoA has the coenzyme A on it. Succinate is that symmetrical molecule. Fumarate is fuming mad because it has the double bond. Malate has been oxidized, right? Hydrated. And oxaloacetate is our starting molecule. So I would love it if you could recognize. Maybe that will be like a quiz question, because you can, or a bonus. Well, you have your homework to look on the quizzes, so that's another thing. But for the test to be able to write out an acetyl group, I think that is not too hard. Right? But definitely knowing the names of what's going on. If organic chemistry was a prerequisite, I would definitely have you know the structures. So those of you that are taking this to take like MCATs or any like graduate degree prereq, know the structures, because you're going to have to know those structures. You should be able to write those out. Okay. So 2 pathways done. How do you guys feel? Pretty good? Overwhelmed? Maybe? No? So this is the pre-citric acid cycle. Pyruvate to go to acetyl-CoA. We get NADH and we lose a carbon dioxide. The citric acid cycle, we put in our acetyl-CoA. We get out 3 NADHs, an FADH2, and a GTP. You put the pre-citric acid cycle with the citric acid cycle, we're going to get 4 NADHs, an FADH, and a GTP. Kind of cool. Now, remember I said that there's a turning in sort of ratio. Phosphorylation for oxidation ratio. Phosphorylation means how many ATPs can we make. So when you turn in an NADH through the electron transport chain, we're going to get 2.5 ATPs. So that turning in the 4 NADHs we get 10 ATPs. That one FADH, there's supposed to be a 2 here. I apologize. Let me go to it here. Didn't write it here. We only get 1.5 ATPs, and the GTP can be exchanged directly for an ATP. So per molecule of pyruvate, with the pre-citric acid cycle and the citric acid cycle put together, we get 12.5. But remember, we get 2 pyruvates for every molecule of glucose. So we have 25 ATPs per glucose. There's some good money there. It's worth it. It's worth it to do your Krebs cycle. All right. So again, in our little summary, we've broken down through glycolysis glucose to 2 molecules of pyruvate in the pre-citric acid cycle. We take that pyruvate and make it our acetyl-CoA, and we lose carbon dioxide. And then we also lose the other 2 carbons from the pyruvate as carbon dioxide through the citric acid cycle. We have oxidations that result in reductions of our coenzymes, our electron carriers, NAD and FADH2. We also get a money molecule of GTP, which can be made into ATP, high energy molecule. All right, so let's see if this is still valid. Bless you. Internet's just very slow. Nope, it's not. It might be, don't worry about it. We have quite a review. All right, what I'd like to do next is talk about the carbons that we put in and when do they come out? Because are the carbons that we put in through the acetyl-CoA the ones that come out in that carbon, the decarboxylations within that first cycle? And they're not. What we're going to do is pretend we're putting radio-labeled carbons, say carbon 13, in as the acetyl-CoA. And then we're going to see how many cycles does it take for those to come in. So pretend that these are yellow because they're radioactive. So they found that when you condense the oxaloacetate and the acetyl-CoA, that this is where those 2 carbons go, all right, in the position of the citrate. And so here, the alpha carbon of the acetyl-CoA attacks the carbonyl carbon of the oxaloacetate. We don't need to, so I guess it's this carbon attacking this carbon. Now, the first decarboxylation, remember, is this one. So it's not from the ones that we put in. It's from one that had already been within the cycle. And our second decarboxylation is this last one, not the yellow ones that we put in. So the white ones are still original from the cycle. And then when we go back to oxaloacetate, you have 2 of the radio-labeled ones, and then 2 of the ones from the previous cycle. And we can see that those radio-labeled ones stay in the cycle for 2 to 3 turns. This is important, guys, that it stays in for 2 to 3 turns. So the carbons, it's like you don't want really old carbons in the citric acid cycle. You want to kind of eventually get them out. So if the carbons that we put in were the first ones to come out, then the oxaloacetate would stay the same carbon. So we refresh it. We refresh it by eventually getting them out. So it's important to know that it takes 2 to 3 turns of the citric acid cycle to get those original carbons out. Should I say it again? It's important to know that it takes 2 to 3 turns of the citric acid cycle to get those carbons that you put in through the acetyl-CoA. Let's talk about control. Remember, there's 3 points of control within the cycle, in the citric acid cycle. The first step, which is the condensation of oxaloacetate with our acetyl-CoA. And remember, it's inhibited by ATP and NADH, and a downstream molecule, acetyl-CoA. I guess I didn't mention it before, but it's also a product inhibited by its citrate. So if a lot of citrate's built up, it's not going to go forward. Our first decarboxylation step, we're going from isocitrate to alpha-ketoglutarate. It's activated by our molecules that are indicators of low energy reserves. ADP and NAD plus are, as we found out from last quiz, right, are molecules that are indicators of low energy reserves. And it's inhibited by high energy reserves. ATP, high levels of ATP and NADH. Our alpha-ketoglutarate dehydrogenase complex, which is our second decarboxylation, going from alpha-ketoglutarate to succinyl-CoA. It's inhibited by, again, ATP and NADH, and its product, and activated by ADP and NAD+. This isn't too bad, is it? Right? If in doubt, what's your inhibitor? ATP or NADH, right? And what's your activator? High levels of ADP or NAD+, right? Okay. I think you guys got that. Now, I don't want you to forget that outside the cycle, it's not within the cycle. So make sure that you're reading my question, all right? Make sure you're reading my question. Am I saying 3 points of control within the cycle or within and outside the cycle? It's that pyruvate dehydrogenase complex going from our pyruvate to acetyl-CoA. It's inhibited by ATP and NADH, and also product inhibited by acetyl-CoA. Now, this pre-citric acid cycle I don't have necessarily on our little review sheet, so maybe you can add it on the back, right? Add it on the back, because it is very important, and it is under control. So I love this slide. This is a great way to see here. We need points of control, pre-citric acid cycle, going from oxaloacetate and acetyl-CoA to citrate, and our oxidative decarboxylation steps. This is where we have inhibition, and they're controlled. The starred steps are points where we need an electron acceptor. So if we don't have electron acceptors, these are not going to go forward. So if you're resting, and hopefully you guys are in a resting state right now, that you're going to have a high ATP and low ADP levels. That implies that you have, you need and you're using little energy. So the ratio of ATP to ADP is high. Also, you have high NADH to NAD+, especially since maybe you ate breakfast and you're here resting. Nice, no one's worrying about it. Cells in an active metabolic state, if you were able to get out for a run this morning, maybe not, then your ATP would be low and high ADP. That would mean low energy reserves. And then high NAD plus and low NADH also implies low energy levels. The energetics. We're going to look at the delta G naught prime. Remember, the naught means 1 molar concentrations. The prime means 1 molar concentrations for everything but pH. So it's pH 7. And let's look at the kilojoules per mole. we can see that the energetics are highly exergonic for a number of steps. For our pre-citric acid cycle, which is under control. For our first step, that's under control. Our first decarboxylation, that is under control, and our second decarboxylation is under control. Now, this last step, you can see is very highly endergonic. It requires energy, but it's going to move forward because the next step is highly exergonic when you go back up to number 1. So it's just like water rushing. Overall, between the pre-citric acid cycle and the citric acid cycle, it is very highly exergonic, very negative delta G. So we're flowing water down a big mountain to get to this step. So what I want to point out to you is that the steps that are under allosteric control have negative delta Gs. Any questions about the citric acid cycle? I'm ready to leave it. Yes?
The fate of the carbons you're talking about, what controls that? Is that just energetics?
No, it's organic chemistry. So the question was, why will those carbons coming in not leave that first time? And what controls why is that your question?
Yeah.
And that is basically the mechanisms of the reactions. That's controlling that. And I think, for me, interpreting that, I think there's a reason why we're refreshing with new carbons. We're not keeping the same carbons in that oxaloacetate going over and over again, that we're refreshing the carbons that come in. Not that a carbon gets old, but it's nice to get in new ones in. Okay, so I'm going to do something here. Take a 2-minute break, okay? I know we didn't lecture for long, but we'll take